Everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive and impart information and ideas through any media and regardless of frontiers. Freedom isn't free. The same applies to our freedom of speech. It isn't free, it isn't absolute, and it shouldn't be taken for granted.
We've had this golden period where the internet has allowed people to communicate to an extent that they've never been able to communicate before. But there are some governments that don't like that. Some of those governments would like to see themselves in control of the internet rather than it being an organic network where everyone is allowed to say what they want. And so I think a few of those governments are going to work very hard to try and break up the internet as we know it.
If you thought old-style dictators would never emerge again in Europe, take a look at Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban. He's polishing his autocratic credentials. Orban recently said he wants to abandon liberal democracy in favour of an illiberal state, citing Russia and Turkey as role models. Really, this is Europe in the 21st century. The risk of dictatorship is not at our doorstep, it is already in the hallway. Orban's choice of template for Hungary should make Europe wake up to a growing threat. Viktor Orban is just part of a movement in Europe to restrict freedom of expression and freedom of speech, often in the interests of national security.
There's a growing trend to restrict freedom of expression, I think, especially online. National security is often invoked as a reason to sometimes even block social media altogether.
In Turkey this summer, the Deputy Prime Minister told women they should stop laughing in public. Really. This is the same Turkey where the Prime Minister blocked Twitter to suppress social protest. Turkey has long been considered a potential member of the European Union, but can Europe seriously accept such oppressive values? And will the European Commission tolerate Viktor Orban's persecution of NGOs and aggressive strategy to limit press freedom? Whoever would overthrow the liberty of a nation must begin by subduing the freeness of speech.
Companies want to avoid controversy at all costs, so they have terms of service that are so broad that they essentially mean nothing. So at any given moment, Facebook or Google or whoever it might be can choose to suspend your account, delete your account, simply to make sure they're safe.
People sometimes make mistakes with what they're doing in their life, or something happens to them that really shouldn't be considered a factor 10 years down the track, in the same way that your criminal record is not a factor 10 years down the track. But the internet doesn't simply erase information in the way that an authority might have erased something from one of your criminal records. And another example of that is young people and children and what they do online. What are the consequences for them later on in life?
I have friends that have been turned down for jobs just because their potential employers checked their Facebook page, the privacy settings were not really limited, and because she was not in favor of our current president François Hollande, he told her that he didn't think that was all right with him because they wouldn't be able to get along, which is terrible because anybody should be able to express their own ideas.
Everything we do on the internet, especially if you talk about the NSA case or other things, you always have to keep in mind the technical possibility to find out what you have done, for example, a year ago or half a year ago. When you are under a special observation, then they find out everything.
Does the sense that we're being watched with everything that we do, everything we say online, chill our freedom of expression?
Absolutely. I think there's a self-censorship among people. For various reasons. I know that there are commentators who've been threatened after their comments, or cartoonists, for example, that have been harassed. So I think that there are trends of self-censorship that are very worrying.
For young people, I think no, to be honest. They perceive of their identity and privacy in a different way to a lot of people from older generations. I think they don't see a boundary between the online world and the offline world. We too often think that you're not allowed to say something that people will be offended by. You know, I think you're allowed to make judgments in life. You're allowed to say, I believe this, but not that. Now, clearly there are limits to that. You don't have a right to say whatever you want. So first of all, you need to respect whatever laws exist. Second of all, there's absolutely no point denigrating one group of people for something that they can't change about themselves.
One of the problems with defending free speech is you often have to defend people that you find to be outrageous and unpleasant and disgusting. Do you think that young people are aware of the legal process involved behind what they say and what they do?
Legal process? Not at all. I think they don't evaluate how dangerous it can be, that you just put on the table everything personal about you.
Children, of course, are the most vulnerable group of our society. Of course, they are, most of the cases, not aware of what they are doing when they are either using the internet, writing or loading photos, etc. We have to be sensitive. We have to discuss how we can protect them the best way.
I'm a big fan of better education so that people themselves can make choices, but not to restrict the freedom of expression, whether it's online or offline.
Teachers in schools, in the families, also the parents, should work on a higher digital literacy.
People often will take a different identity or project themselves in a different way online. And that sometimes leads them to think that it's different from the real world. It's not, it's the same. You have the same rights and the same responsibilities, and that's something that people of all generations need to learn.
What's really important is for media education to be as good as it possibly can be. There are a lot of assumptions one can make about using online media. It seems like it's anonymous. It seems like there's nobody going to be reading it. So the more educated children can become about what's actually happening, that people do read, that people can be offended, the better.
What you certainly need to do is A, educate young people about the consequences of their behaviour online, and you certainly need to educate enforcement officers, be they police, be that data protection authorities, so that they have an understanding of how to most usefully deal with cases where kids are doing something silly. The internet's worked very well now because it hasn't been heavily regulated. We shouldn't just come up with a whole new set of laws and crush what has been this really vibrant space. We have to protect children, for example, but not crush the space that they found so interesting in the first place.
In the United Kingdom, the House of Lords Communications Committee has just carried out an inquiry into the legal and regulatory framework surrounding social media offences. The inquiry is a direct response to increasing numbers of social media prosecutions and concerns about the effect of technology on consumer behaviour. The committee decided there's no need to adopt new legislation to criminalise revenge porn, trolling, virtual mobbing or cyberbullying, and the committee made it clear that what is not an offence offline should not be an offence online. But it did recommend identity checks prior to the opening of social media accounts. Free speech organisation Article 19 said it welcomed the committee's findings as a step in the right direction, but warned against a crackdown on anonymity. Twitter pointed out in its oral evidence before the committee that anonymity is vital for human rights defenders, journalists and activists who operate in difficult areas where dissent is violently repressed. The committee did not go as far as advising that grossly offensive speech should be decriminalised. Article 19 said this was disappointing as international standards on freedom of expression clearly say that communication that is merely offensive is not a legitimate basis for restricting freedom of expression, and that the test for what is grossly offensive does not comply with requirements of legal certainty.
When people feel offended, it doesn't mean that the person who has expressed him or herself has actually broken the law. I'm not in favor of heavy prosecutions. I'm in favor of making open societies where the freedom of expression is a fundamental right more resilient, and where I would prefer an active debate where there can be a countering of different opinions and where there can be transparency instead of pushing certain opinions underground.
We had several times in the European Parliament a discussion how to protect individuals, especially youngsters, which are very much using the internet and digital media. I would say we have to harmonize more the rules. Of course, we are always a step behind. The technology is advancing very fast.
The truth is, a lot of our laws haven't caught up with the digital age. That includes freedom of expression, but it's not limited to that. We're constantly finding ourselves in a situation where we wrote a law, for example, in the 1990s, before the internet took off, before a whole new generation of people had this as part of their daily existence. And so it's not that the laws can't work in the new era, but they frequently need updating.
What we're missing is consistency of what is the law, when should the law be applied, and when is it simply not appropriate to have the online space policed by private companies.
At the moment we don't have the competence to do this, because especially media politics, cultural politics and other things are in the competence of the member states. But we have the Charter of Human Rights, and the basis of freedom of expression is the basis of the human values and the values we accept.
We have begun to talk seriously about that, and I think that the coming 5 years will be very important, because most people and member states are conscious, some, that we have to do something, and the European level is the level where something can be done. Because if each member state does its own legislation, that will be a real mess.
Iverna McGowan, Director of Programmes at Amnesty International in Brussels, told us we must all understand the importance that freedom of expression plays in relation to other human rights. Everyone has the right to seek, receive and impart information and ideas without fear or interference. She added that Amnesty focuses a lot on the work of human rights defenders whose actions depend on and fuel freedom of expression. McGowan remarked that because of their activities, human rights defenders can often become a target of abuse, hence the need for more vigilant protection. If freedom of speech is taken away, then dumb and silent, we may be led like sheep to the slaughter.